Okay, so welcome to this conversation, magical conversation. We hope, as I am Pauline Crawford-Oms, and I'm delighted to have Ibeh with me. We've had some problems with our connection, so let's hope this works. Can you hear me, Ibeh?
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Excellent. Now you are an industrial psychologist consultant, and as we discussed, you go into businesses and you work at a very high level, working on how people engage in business. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and also you've written several books now, one of which you sent to me, which is about collaboration, and I love the essence of this. I certainly would agree with what you say in your book, which is it's about trust, respect, willingness on empowerment and effective communication. And as we converse, we can explain a bit more about that. But my interest today in this series is what do you think is happening for men today in terms of how they're approaching business and with regards to there being women or not being women in those very executive top levels? What's your experience?
Well, it is obvious that the top executives are predominantly male, right?
Yes.
Right. And, it raises a lot of questions. Why? Why is this? Why? I mean, even though the workforce is female and much higher now, right? In the workforce. But why is it like the higher we go, the thinner, you see, female executives?
Yeah.
And that's a question that I still struggle with because it doesn't make sense, to me. And but the only way that I used to console myself or to make sense out of it and be hopeful about it is that there's what is called desire thinking. I don't know if you heard about that before.
No, I haven't. Explain.
Yeah, desire thinking is basically, seeing your world from a positive perspective, which means, hoping that things will get better from here on, no matter what. So desire thinking will put you in a position where your mindset will not be like you are being defeated. Instead, your mindset will be, I will get better day by day. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. So
yeah.
in terms of some of the environments where you go into where it's all men at the top, do they have any idea of a desired outcome that would embrace men and women working together? I mean, and is it true that often in those organizations, the further down, there are women employees?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I've traveled extensively, and it is very obvious and it's evident that I think over 90% of executives are male figure. It's very obvious. And back to what I was saying about desire thinking, my prescription that I'm thinking that we can take that route is the ability to see if we can basically present it to our counterparts, which is female or women, to see it as a challenge and not as a crutch.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So instead of saying why us or why me, well, why don't you say why not me? That way it will test my abilities. And there is a book out there called You Are the Placebo.
Ah, okay.
You Are the Placebo by Joe Dispenza.
Oh, yes, and he's a very, very good writer.
Okay. It's basically, go ahead, I'm sorry.
What is he saying? Is he, where's the placebo come in with regards to women gaining entry to those top levels?
No, I don't think that he focused his teachings on gender differences, but instead his teaching is based on human beings. How can you rise above the challenge that you're facing? And he's saying that your thought is a product. What you see is a product of your thought process.
Yes.
So what I'm thinking is if we can apply the same principles, in the workplace, which I have seen several times. If you can think, if there is any woman anywhere in the world who is in a powerful position, we'll probably study that very person and find out how she did it.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Instead of thinking about why is it all men, let's think about how can we do it like X female did it.
Yes. So also, I agree with you, and I think because we know there are a small percentage of organisations where there is a top woman, but often she's surrounded by men. So aiming to get the balance is that my view is that we need to open up a possibilities conversation, that the possibility of something being quite different and based on some very good case studies, where often that's not the big corporates, but it's organizations, for instance, like Sir Richard Branson's Virgin. He's a very good example of a male leader who really understands people and has a very, very mixed workforce, not only men and women, but ages and, all diverse issues. And it all comes from him because he has that vision that people are important. So it's how do we initiate this conversation which will encourage more women to find entry to the top level?
I think this is just my my own 2 cents. I think starting the conversation is the first thing.
Yes.
Having a candid conversation, not to go about it. For example, if you're in a corporation where you have mostly men, predominantly male on the in the top level, it won't be a bad idea for a woman or a female in that position of authority to ask that question. If you look around you, why is it 90% male around me? For example, the female asking that, a woman asking that question. Can we have an open conversation about this? Instead of being political about it or being diplomatic about it, just put it on the table.
Yes.
And say, let's discuss it.
Yeah, well, I agree, because one of the things that has come to me, especially in interviewing a lot of men about this, a lot of men have said to me, well, we just don't know what that would be like. We're a bit confused about what women want and what's going to happen. And I believe that's happened because we've kind of fought our corner over the last 6 decades and said, we must be there and there must be a mandate. And I think that kind of demand battle has caused men to step back. Do you think that's possibly true?
Yeah, there's validity to that. There is truth to that, yeah.
And that there hasn't been what I'd call a strategic conversation about, and I often call it a merger. I think it's been a battle of the smaller element trying to get into the current history of men's work. And now I think it's about the value, the value of what people contribute, and obviously changing the system to some respect, because we know that there are limits on how women are seen as their credentials in the boardroom, for instance. Do you, in your work, when you're working with mainly men, do you feel that there are different types of men there, and some are more open than others? And if so, how do we find those men?
Yes, I'm working with a CEO right now, a male figure, and we had this conversation, and what he told me was he realized that some women, I'll use the word, some women try to water down their qualifications, that way they can fit in.
Yeah.
And he's saying that's not right, because they shouldn't water down their qualifications in order to fit in. And I also have one experience about a lady. She's also a psychologist. She had a PhD in industrial psychology. And at some point, she told people not to call her Dr. X. Use the doctor in her name. Just call me by my name. And all those things were just for her to fit in. That way,
Okay.
she won't be looked at a powerful figure. But it shouldn't be that way. That's what she worked for, and
Yes.
she's entitled for that position that she's working on.
Yeah, and I think in my study of the differences between genders, women, we have and this is not true of all women, but we do have a natural sense of relationships being important. Therefore, we aim to fit in. And I had the example of a woman who I helped her get into this non-exec board as a financial CFO. But when she turned up for the first meeting, she played down her role because so she actually made the coffee.
Right.
And that was a real mistake because they were all men, and they kind of went, oh yeah, that's good. She's a woman. She'll make the coffee. Now it's a silly but true example. And she was only doing it to be nice. And after a few months felt very downgraded. And I suggested to her that actually the chairman was probably disappointed in her behavior because it wasn't what she exhibited at her interview.
Right.
So if with this particular example of dare I say, a wise CEO that you're working with, he has an awareness that he wants women to be around, but not sure necessarily maybe how to handle them. Is that the case?
Yeah, it is possible. I just want to let you know that I read what the example you just gave now, I read it in your book.
Yeah.
It's in your book. I read it, and when I read it, I said, I didn't know it happened. I mean, that was quite surprising.
Well, I think it happens a lot. A bit like your example of the a woman who doesn't want to be called doctor anymore in case maybe she feels it lifts her up too high or somebody's going to call her out. But we, as women, our differential is that we have this core nurturing energy. Do you think that in the work that you do, that men see other men differently? I mean, there's a range of men out there. This is what I study in my gender dynamics format, is there are some very, dare I say, masculine men who are good men, but they are very in that box of, this is the way it is. Yeah, I'd love to have women here, but not yet because we're too busy, working on the business.
Right.
And then you get some men who are more intuitively grounded, but they may not necessarily be the ones running the business. Is that your experience?
Yes. Another thing if I might pinch in there is there's this idea of men, we talk in a straight line.
Yeah.
Okay, so it has to be some kind of awareness for us to be aware that when we are talking to, for example, a woman, we have to be aware and conscious about the conversation we are having. Yes. Does that make sense? Yeah, we have to make ourselves available, open the floor by not being so macho or so masculine or trying to prove a point. Just open the floor for people to express themselves.
I agree. Yes.
And if I may add, there's a social psychologist called David William. He talked about what is called unconscious bias.
Yes.
Or unconscious thinking.
Yes.
So basically, if you have any kind of preconceived notion about a particular group or a person or a thing, we have a tendency of behaving differently toward that group or that person.
Yes.
So there are some men who have this unconscious bias. We don't even know we have it. That once we see a woman involved, in our mind, we are struggling with that, how to handle that. So sometimes unconscious bias might be another challenge that we face when it comes to gender differences in the workplace.
Yes, I agree. And I have come across that because we have conscious bias, which is laid down in our experiences and our prejudices. But I think, and those are pernicious and we have to deal with those. But I think it's the unconscious bias of just almost looking at our biology and how we do things differently, that needs to become more part of the fabric of business. Because the thing that surprises me is there is good evidence that when men and women run organizations, there's a collective benefit.
That's right.
And recently there was a business roundtable of the top corporate men, and I think it was mainly men, who signed a pledge to say, even the head of, JP Morgan Stanley and all these places, that we recognize that people are more important or as important as profit.
That's right.
And I thought, well, that's a very good marker in the stand, but what does it mean?
Yeah.
Because it's very broad stroke. And the work you do is to engage leaders in the human side of business. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Do you think there's a shift? I mean, in the years that you've been doing this, do you think there is a shift in men's mind to want to do things different or open up their emotional template?
Yes, I do believe that. Let me give you one example. The recent example I had was when I was in Dubai presenting. There were professors, women professors from Pakistan and all the, Middle East. But the way they presented themselves was quite impressive. And after the meeting, they came to me and asked me that they liked my style of presentation, which was more conversational.
Yeah.
Instead of being very technical, heavily technical in psychology. So the conversational part of it opened that streamline for us to have an honest conversation. So the person next to me, the presenter next to me, did the same thing. He found himself having a conversational presentation instead of all technical about it. So I've seen men coming along using that avenue, that conversational style, to ease up the environment without making the environment so tense.
Yes.
So I think for collaboration to take place, the environment has to be mutual. The environment has to be welcoming and without all this hierarchy of needs, all this hierarchy that we have. Okay, I'm this, I'm that. You have to introduce that, the atmosphere that will be inviting and welcoming to everybody. It doesn't have to be gender. Everybody has to feel that way. That's what I've noticed over the years I'm doing this work.
But that is really interesting, and obviously aligns with my viewpoint, is that we seem to have got very stuck on diversity and inclusion being key, and yet we get so focused on the topics like racial tension or sexual orientation or generational differences and gender differences. We don't get down to the real conversation, which is we're all human beings.
That's right.
And we need to, economies being as they are, we need to stop wasting time arguing about things and actually get on with what is the best way to create a more economically stable and sustainable future. So I like the idea you were talking about is conversation. And I do believe in my study that women generally are born to be conversationalists. And we almost go to the other extreme where we're chatted too much. And I often teach my female clients the strategy of being aware that if you chatter too much with a man who isn't that interested in conversation, you're on a hiding to nothing.
Right.
But do you think that, therefore, like the presenter who came after you and was more than conversational, was that a natural shift for him?
No, I won't say it was natural. I think what happened was he saw how the audience responded to my presentation.
Yeah.
And when he got up there, the first 5 minutes, he struggled, basically. He felt like, he wanted to stick to the PowerPoint, cite the PowerPoint. But he kept saying, he noticed that people were kind of distancing from him. They were not connecting.
Yeah.
So he started asking questions and asking people, what do you think? Tell me more. That way you draw more from people, out of people, than just imposing your own ideologies or your own ideas on them. So what he did was he opened that platform where people got involved.
Yes.
Through asking questions.
Well, that's really good. So what I sense from that is something that I see is that men can be, all people can be quite what I call instructional. You know, that if you give an instruction, and we're often brought up that way, aren't we? You know, when you go to school,
right,
you're supposed to listen to what the teacher says, and if the teacher says, you know, don't do that or do this, you get into a system of listening to instructions. And then we have the art of the what if and the questions and the opening up. And I think that's often a challenge in the world, is there's a camp which says, no, we just need instructions and we go this way and we win. And the others say, no, we need to sit and talk about it.
That's right.
And of course, in the very, if you look at indigenous tribes and how we would have sat around the campfire because there was no electricity, and we'd have had a conversation, be it that some would be very chattery, but some would be maybe, you know, deciding how we were going to go to war or whatever. But that, I think, in my experience of, dare I say, the very old-minded male, and it might be that for free men, that we took conversation out of business over decades, and now we've got to bring it back. And many people don't quite know what conversation means. And in my experience, I'd like to know your views, that sometimes in general men like less conversation than more. Is that true?
Yeah, well, I would say true, but in the work that I do, you know, in the field of business psychology, what I usually do is use, you know, for example, you have to get people involved in the conversation. That's my style. I will, you know, use the word like, tell me more. What do you mean by this? Is it possible? Are you saying this? So when you get people to keep talking more in the whatever area that you guys are discussing, you see the person more relaxed.
Yes.
So when you say, tell me more or say more, that's quite interesting. You see the person opening up instead of making it very, you know, like a monologue, make it a dialogue.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think we're on the same line. This is the shift.
Yeah.
It still needs to be on topic in order to go forward.
Right.
And that, I think, is something that I sometimes have to open up that dialogue with women, where they can sometimes go off on a tangent too far and not stay on topic, which is where that conversation. But I love your ideas about the questions, you know, tell me more.
Yeah.
How is it going?
Right.
And that could be the very simple instruction that opens up dialogue.
Yes. Yes, because once you say, tell me more, you are politely asking the person to educate you, to teach you what you don't know.
Yeah.
That's what people hear when they say that, tell me more. Okay, now the person that you're asking to tell you more is now in the position of teaching you. At least the mindset is to get to the person to be a little more relaxed.
Yes.
You know, say more, tell me more. I'm interested in what you are saying.
Yeah.
And then when the person drifts away, you just bring him back, or bring his, you know, him or her back to the station. But make it more conversational and more focused on the person as opposed to me, for example.
Yeah. So engaging the other person.
Yes.
Spending more time asking the right questions.
Right.
And this is great, because as you know, in my book, Magical Conversations, those are part of the rules. Is that, you know, the first rule being that you try and understand your judgmental unconscious bias or your prejudice one, and you don't actually allow yourself to speak judgments.
Right.
And that's what you do so well, is that you're coming from your experience and saying, oh, well, tell me more.
Right.
And that involves using people's, you know, dopamine levels. It makes them happier, and oh my gosh, I can get involved.
That's right.
And
that's right.
Really, one of the things I find fascinating about it is that this cuts across all these stuck, diverse issues.
Right.
You know, whether you're old or young, black or white, you know, LGBT or whatever it is you're a human being.
Right.
And assuming you're speaking the language that is around you, you should be able to enter that conversation always.
I've had a 14-year-old ask me a question. She said, Dad, how is this so easy for you whenever you get in a crowd that you don't even know? You just get along with them. I said, all you need is just be yourself, carry a conversation with people. Most people want to hear about themselves.
Yes.
Like if I come to you, I'll ask you, how you doing? You say, well, your hair look nice, or, I like your smile, or I like find something that will connect. And then I will let you lead. People like to lead. Psychologically, they like to lead in their minds.
They do. So let me ask you a question then. How do we ensure that people are trained to be in a conversation like that? Because we know some people get very stuck on me. Mm-hmm. And, definitely there are some male and female leaders like that. Mm-hmm. They feel that they have to be so decisive and so limited that this is the way it is. How do we encourage those to become conversationalists?
Well, I think in my work, I've trained myself to speak less and listen actively. Sometimes I will ask one question that will lead you to open up more. For example, I usually ask people, tell me 5 common words that you use on every day, like phrase or phrases. And I've had people ask people to tell me what they know about me, the phrase that I use. They repeated, tell me more. What do you think? What do you think? Yeah. That's quite interesting. Really, when you say stuff like that, you are drawing that person, the conversation. Yes. Right? So you speak less and listen more.
Okay, well, that's really good advice. So speak less and listen more. And so if we are to change the world, to mm-hmm. create a future where there is not necessarily an equal number, but certainly a freedom for men and women to be invited into that top level. Obviously, they need to earn their way up there. I'm not saying they shouldn't be competent. But in terms of that space at the top, it is about opening the doors to different attitudes.
That's correct.
Because I know that in studying this, there is some view that, for instance, women in business don't get funds as easily when they're running their own business. When women are going for an appointment at the top, the critical credentials are often, well, you haven't been at the top, so you can't be at the top. And you go, okay. So it's, for what I see is that it's, and I think you have access to that, is, I would say, finding the wise men like the CEO you might be talking to, and the wise women who go, yeah, we've got this far, we need to do things differently now. We need to open up that conversation, so maybe we don't always apply the same credentials. We let somebody in there because we've broadened the criteria, or we help the man who is seeking a more balanced board to help other men to understand why. Because that's something I've come across where almost a male leader has said, yeah, I want that to happen, but I don't know how I explain it to the other men. And that's where you and I come in to help. Do you think that happens as well quite a lot? That there's a fear in men about how to lead other men?
Yeah, I published an article on Forbes. I don't know if you have time, look at, check it out.
I will do.
Yes, it's called, if I can remember, Psychological Comfort, How to Create Psychological Comfort in the Workplace.
Excellent. We'll look that up and put the link in when we publish this.
Yeah, how to create a psychological comfort in the workplace. And one of them is what is called emotional integrity.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, emotional integrity is being honest emotionally about yourself. How do you feel?
Yes.
When you come to a place, it doesn't matter whether you're male or female. All this, social construct that we use, gender is a social construct.
Yes.
Yeah. So it becomes a barrier to our communication. So if we have that mindset of emotional integrity, how do you feel? Like, again, I go back to what what I said earlier. With that emotional integrity, you create an environment where people can have a conversation.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's right. And the freedom to be able to say, well, I don't see it that way, or I feel uncomfortable about that statement. Could we clarify more? It's all those conversations of, I often say it's about valuing differences. So the differences are not a barrier at all. The differences are actually the best thing.
Right.
The best thing that's going. And so the baseline is that, biologically and psychologically, men and women are different, but that doesn't mean they're not the same in terms of quality. They just bring different things into the meeting. Right. So the man who doesn't want to have too much conversation, but he still understands that some conversation is a good idea, and the woman who maybe talks too much understands that she needs to be aware when people are looking confused.
Right.
And then by example and experience and good results, we go, oh, actually, this is a good way of being.
Right. I suspect one thing, though. This is one thing I've also observed, that most men, I don't think it's true that men don't want to have a conversation. I think it's the topic or the material that you bring to the table that men don't want to discuss about. So if we can study one another, just like male we study a woman, if he can study what language, what words, because words are powerful.
Yeah.
If you use the right one, you will trigger the person, and that will break down all the barriers. Yes. So there's a high need for us to study one another, even in the workplace, just like we study our spouse.
Yes.
You study one another and say, what makes this person this? Not to take advantage of the person, but just to understand how the person operates.
Yes.
And once you understand that, there are ways. You break down this barrier of gender differences. That's what I've noticed over the years. And then there was one time I went to a conference. Okay, Colin Powell. I don't know if you remember. Secretary of State.
Oh yes, yeah, I've heard.
Okay, they were all generals everywhere, all the big kahunas everywhere. And then when I walked in, there was a man. I didn't know the guy was a vice president of a big corporation. So when I introduced myself, the first question that came out of his mouth is, where are you from? So I asked him, does it matter where I'm from? We are here to hear, Colin Powell speak.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where I'm from. Why would the first thing out of your mouth is to ask me where am I from? That's irrelevant. So we ended up becoming friends. Even today, we are still friends. But instead of being aggressive to the question, I basically educate him that you can't come in contact with a person the first time and use such an explosive, asking me where am I from.
Yes, but and it's interesting about because there's also an assumption in answering the question as to what he might have meant, isn't it?
Right.
Because you could have said, well, I came from the station.
Right.
I came from my taxi. I mean, yeah, because, there's an assumption like, I often say when I'm presenting here in the US, I say, I've come here direct from London, but via 7 years doing something else. Okay. But it throws people off, it's like, I think one of the things you did say, I want to just come back on, it says, just to be myself, which I agree with. I think potentially a lot of people don't know themselves yet.
That's right.
And that's really what your work is about, what my work is about, is introducing people to themselves and then introducing them to other people in some ways, conversations, frameworks, whatever it is, whatever helps.
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of good things that we can do, this has been a fantastic, magical conversation. And as we bring it to a close, what's the one piece of advice you would give to men then today? What do they, of all the things you said, what's the most important thing that men can do for themselves?
One thing that I will close it by using one of the psychologists. I read a lot, so it's called, Albert Bandura, psychologist Albert Bandura. He's the one who introduced self-efficacy.
Okay.
Yeah, self-efficacy is basically self-awareness. So what I will propose to men is, instead of spending time trying to figure somebody else out or trying to discredit somebody else, why don't you spend some energy studying yourself?
Excellent.
Study yourself.
Excellent. So for men, study yourself. So here's a last challenge question is, what advice would you give to women today, women in business, to understand men? What could they do now? Well,
men, I do believe that when you mention humanity is more powerful than gender. So depending on who is standing in front of you, first of all, you have to read the body language. It doesn't matter whether it's a female or a male, but if you read the body language, understand the body language, that way you can know the codes you can use to break down the barrier of so-called, corporate America. Because corporate America are made up of human beings. We're not robots.
Yeah.
So
that's really good. Yeah. So if I summarize that for women and men alike, but for women especially, is to really focus on the body language, tune into people. If they're going in, maybe if they're going into an unusually different environment, which is maybe all males, still to be themselves, but to evaluate the body language around them.
Yes, there's a book called, I think it's called Body Dictionary by Joe Navarro. No, body language, body language.
Yeah.
You might want to, we might want to read that about body language. It will really help us understand one another. It's good for men, it's good for women, and it's good for workplace.
That's good. And I love that, and I will put that on my reading list, because in my study, I study body structure and how we stand and how that impacts the way we are. And that's a conversation for another time, but this time, let's finish this interview. I think we could go on a long time, and the recording has worked really well, but we'll close the interview now and carry on our own discussion. But for me, Ibeh, let me ask you to say your name, because I couldn't pronounce your surname. So tell the viewers what your full name is and how they could contact you if they need you.
Yes, my name is Ibeh Agbanyim. And to reach me, you can just go to Power of Engagement at att.net.
Fantastic. Power of Engagement at att.net. And I love that, the power of engagement. In fact, I did a session on the power of sharing, so it's very, very aligned. Ibeh, thank you so much. We will close this now, and when I post it up, we'll see what conversations we can start going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you.
Oops. Let me just close this.